Tax the rich. It's slowly starting to sink into a lot of people that actually taxing the rich is not a bad idea. In fact, it's probably going to be overwhelmingly a very good idea. Most of you who have watched a couple of my Good Morning Walks will know in the past I've talked about how for Argentina, for example, to help pay for essentially all the care and the furlough that has gone on during their pandemic season, they introduced what was called a one-off wealth tax, where they tax their most wealthiest citizens. Not only has it paid for all their furlough, it's paid for all their medical costs of the country, with money to spare over to help them keep the country going during that pandemic time. So the big question again must be asked, as well as not only here but around the world, why are we not taxing the rich? In the UK, 1% of the wealthiest people hold the equivalent wealth of about 69% of the lowest income earners in this country. That is an absolutely unbelievable number. But as we are constantly told by essentially a lot of conservatives, that apparently the money isn't there, that austerity was necessary. And even though we are told that we are one of, again, the most richest, successful countries in the world, there's never ever seems to be any money to help pay for most of these social projects. So I think, as you're about to agree when we go into this article, it's about time to tax the rich. So before we do jump into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, and of course the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support me that way. So, say this comes from The Guardian, and it says the title of the article is "It's time for a new tax on the UK's wealthiest 1%, and arguments against it don't add up." As government raises taxes on working people and plans the biggest benefit cut in the history of the welfare state, many are calling for rich people to pay their fair share. A new net wealth tax could redistribute wealth, galvanize public support, and generate huge revenues for the government. At the University of Greenwich, we have estimated that such a tax on the top 1% of the wealthiest households in the UK could raise between £70 billion to £130 billion a year. That is more than enough to pay for a high-quality universal care service and the NHS and more. When it comes to taxation, we often hear the slogans that those with the broadest shoulders should often bear the heaviest burden. A net wealth tax on the top 1% turns this slogan into a very feasible policy. Net wealth encapsulates someone's control over their economic resources. This combines financial property, pension, and business assets, minus debts like a tailor. It measures the size of one's shoulders and keeps the mathematical terms very clean. The tax on this combined wealth of the top 1% has the power to generate billions of pounds each year. With our proposal, wealthier households would face an increasing marginal tax rates for the top 1%, i.e. those who accumulate wealth more than 3.4 million, paying anything at all. Household wealth between 3.4 and 5.7 million would be taxed at 1%. Between the 5.7 and 18.2 million at 5%, and above the 18.2 million at 10%. For example, this means that a household that owes 4 million would only pay about 6,000 a year. The 1% of the 600,000 that they owe above the 3.4 million cutoff, and anyone below that 3.4 mark would not pay an extra penny. Wealth taxes are popular because they can raise revenue while tackling inequality. Before the pandemic, the top 1% of the wealth that the bottom 60% of the 9% of the population. And as a number of both billionaires and those using food banks saw, Such a large gap between the rich and the poor is cited as the main reason the British public supports wealth taxes over many of the other tax rises. Yet, despite this public support and the vast revenues to be made, the mere mention of wealth taxes generates huge criticism. Why won't rich people just get up and leave? The argument on the face of it often seems to be of devastating any proposal of the wealth tax. In our hyper-globalized world, money just doesn't talk, it walks. Rich people already hide their assets abroad. Giving up any British residency or any fragment of their wealth between family members and adding a wealth tax, and the assets will surely fly out of the country, as the saying should go. There are two brutal facts about life, though: death and tax avoidance by the rich. But tax avoidance isn't inevitable. It's a policy choice. Completing a global wealth registry and properly funding the HM revenue and customs and sanctioning financial institutions that allow tax evasion, as the US currently does, will limit the offshoring of assets to discourage people from just simply packing up their bags and flying off to Monaco. A very hefty exit tax on vacating wealthy individuals could be imposed. Against this, again, this is in practice is in the US. Even if we assume that that enforcement is weak and at least about 50% of the revenues of the new wealth of tax is evaded, a tax on the top 1% could still bring an annual £70 billion for the exchequer. That is about 5 times the revenue for the national insurance rise outlined by the government last week. The second argument against the wealth tax concerns those who are asset rich but cash poor. Whether it involves farms, family businesses, or aristocratic estates, there will be many in the top 1% who will argue that they cannot afford to pay that tax because they have no liquid assets. The last time a UK wealth tax was seriously considered by the government was in the 1970s, and a campaign was led by aristocrats and farmers stoked fears that the tax would lead to a sell-off of Britain's heritage estates. After more than 1 million people signed the petition in defence of the English country house, this tax was shelved. A Danish wealth tax was also abolished back in 1997, in part due to very similar protests from owners of historic castles. Using liquidity concerns, wealthy people have often lobbied to exempt particular assets from wealth tax. However, the graveyards of history are littered with wealth tax that gave in to such demands. As soon as heritage sites and family businesses or even a primary residence becomes exempt, the wealthy flood and flock to try and avoid the tax. For example, after the Spain exempted business assets from their wealth tax back in 1994, the wealthiest 0.01% just shifted their increasingly portfolio and share of business assets from 15% to 77% in just a few years. In one particular area, this is exempt from a wealth tax. It should come as no surprise that the very wealthy people will all of a sudden somehow find a way to move many of their assets into that bracket. Claims that the top 1% do not have enough to pay should therefore be taken with a very much of a pinch of salt. Those who do have real liquidity concerns, households could borrow against their wealth, and the government could even offer lines of credit. People could also be given the option to pay with shares of their assets, which the government could even then sell or even keep if it wants to protect a particular heritage or indeed environmental asset. As graduates face at the moment a 50% marginal tax rates, the benefits cuts will plunge about 500,000 families into poverty. The new call for a new progressive wealth tax will become ever more popular than it currently is, with a proportional rise of about 70 billion being about 8% of the year of the total tax revenues that is currently taken by the government. The financial benefits do add up, while the criticism of wealth taxes just simply don't. And I'm very, very much in agreement with that. Very, very much in agreement. I think we do need to start taxing the rich in this country. We are constantly told by the Conservatives how wealthy this country is, and yet, for some reason, we don't have enough money to properly fund the NHS. We suddenly don't have enough money to pay for furlough, all the other stuff, and especially when we're going to a period of economic recovery. Again, if Boris Johnson really wants to level up the north, maybe he should start taxing the rich for it. might be quite wealthy. It might be quite a wealthy opinion, especially as the report says there, between about 70 billion to 130 billion pounds. Yeah, it just makes perfect sense to do it, and the arguments against it, as I said, just don't add up. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And we'll see you all next time.